السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين، وصلى الله على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وعلى من تبعهم بإحسان ودعا بدعوتهم إلى يوم الدين. وبعد، سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا، وزدنا علما وعملا يقربنا إليك يا رب العالمين. اللهم افتح لنا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من أن أضل أو أضل، أزل أو أزل، أظلم أو أظلم، أجهل أو أجهل علي. رب يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين والخير. آمين. Honorable respected brothers, elders, mothers and sisters, we begin by thanking Allah. We begin by praising Allah. We send our choicest and the best salutations and benediction of Allah upon the messengers and the prophets of Allah, in particular Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us all and accept our presence, and may He continue to shower His blessings upon the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Brothers and sisters, today is the 28th of Ramadan. SubhanAllah, nearly the whole month has gone by. In no time we have reached to the end of the month of Ramadan. Barely a day or two remain and left. It's a time of ihtisab. It's a time of retrospection, reflection, and holding oneself to account, to cover up and to catch up the missed deeds that one had intended to do but did not do so yet. Therefore, we need to value each and every moment that we have with us, making sure we're not wasting it. It's a reminder, it's an address to myself and all of us present here, all of us listening to this, because it's a gift of Allah, it's a gift of Rahman that once again visited us and about to depart. Our conditions, our spiritual state, tell us a lot about our own self, how we treated this gift of Rahman, and how we benefited from the gift of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, none of us can claim that we really have fulfilled the dues of Ramadan. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, it's a humble reminder that from today onwards until Ramadan leaves us, we should really be very cautious, engaging in hasanat, in ibadat, in tilawat as much as possible, and not to engage in anything that is going to destroy the spirit of Ramadan, waste it. They say, Muqaddam rahimahullah ta'ala has mentioned that what matters the most is not how we started Ramadan, rather what matters the most is how you ended Ramadan. Because generally we are very enthusiastic when Ramadan starts, because we are just experiencing it, the rhythm, the momentum, the spirituality. But as time moves on, because it is 1 month duration, with time that zeal, the dedication, the enthusiasm oftentimes dies out. And we are no longer spiritually motivated as we were in the beginning of Ramadan. But what matters to Allah is how you ended Ramadan. There are people who started Ramadan with the best of the intention and effort, but towards the end, for no reason, they had slacked and light and became lazy. So then they are going to be considered among the losers. They never want to be among them. This is one thing that is very important for us all as a reminder to keep in mind. The other thing that I wanted to talk about specifically today is as we reach towards the end of Ramadan, there is one particular religious injunction and hukum that is directed to us as Muslims, as the people of fast. And that is what we call Sadaqatul Fitr. This has been addressed as Sadaqatul Fitr, Zakatul Fitr, or Morning Fitr, etc., etc., or Sadaqatul Haqq. All of these are different expressions of the same concept. We know somewhat the nature of this, but it is important to revisit some of the very important concepts that pertain to this topic and some of the ahkam relating to this. First and foremost, what is Sadaqatul Fitr? Sadaqatul Fitr or Zakatul Fitr is a financial obligation very much similar to the zakat itself. It's a monetary obligation that is mandated upon Muslims. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as we find in the hadith, Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he says, فَرَضَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم زَكَاةَ الْفِطْرِ. The reason I say it is an obligation because Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu in Sahih hadith says that Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mandated this Sadaqatul Fitr upon the Muslim. And now the question, the next point to ponder and reflect, why, what is the purpose of it, and why has it been legislated, introduced, and mandated? We learn also from the hadith reported by Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, it has two purposes. One, طهرة للصائم من اللغو والرفث. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam enjoined this charity, which is an obligation, as a form, as a source of purification to the fasting person from idle talk, vain activities during the month of Ramadan, things that was inappropriate, not sinful. Sinful is a different issue altogether. But things that were inappropriate items and matters, for example, vain talk, lagh, this is what it refers to. And warrafas, obscenities, immoral behavior. So this Sadaqatul Fitr that we pay, it serves as an expiation and to fix the issues that we have had during the month of Ramadan in terms of fulfilling the spiritual requirement of the fasting. And the other aspect, طعمة للمساكين, to feed the poor, to take care of the needy in the society. This is also among those types of sadaqat that is, by and large, as scholars they say, that it is exclusively for Muslims. So these are the two reasons. One is to fix our own issues that we had in our fasting. The other is to take care of the other. Now, the next point, that who are the one that this charity is necessary upon? Fuqaha, they have two different approaches and understanding on this. According to Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, and others, it is like fard, like any other fara'id. It is fard like any other fara'id, indeed, like prayer, zakat, fasting itself. And Imam Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi regards it as wajib, but this ikhtilaf is just the ikhtilaf of the word, but in essence they all agree on its importance and its significance. They all say it is something that it must be taken care of, it must be paid and fulfilled. And so with respect to this, there is a criteria that, especially in Fiqh Hanafi, that has been described, and also in other madhahib al-fiqhiyya. Looking at Fiqh Hanafi, a person who owns X amount of money surplus from his essential needs, like the daily expenses and things like that. And what is that amount? Based on silver, it is like 6.12 gram, and it's 612 gram silver. So if you convert that into Canadian dollars, it is going to be about $410. $410 is the threshold. So a person, and generally by and large, everyone has this
in ownership this much amount. But other fuqaha, they have taken it further strict and measure in this regard, and they said a person who has the qut, yani the food for the day, for himself and for his family, and anything that is beyond that he has to pay Sadaqatul Fitr. And just for the day, and a day or two for himself and his family members, if he has enough food, and whatever the surplus that he has, if it is sufficient and significant and surplus, then the person is required to pay Sadaqatul Fitr. And when it comes to Sadaqatul Fitr, there is also something different compared to Zakat. Zakat, according to, for example, Fiqh Hanafi, it requires the person has to be aqil, sane, has to be baligh, reach the age of puberty, and 1 whole year has to go by. But when it comes to Sadaqatul Fitr, as soon as a person has this much amount of money in his possession, it is not a requirement that whole year has to go by. Likewise, aql and bulugh is also not a requirement in any of the madhahib, in fact, even Fiqh Hanafi. So a person, let's say, who has this much amount of money today, and if it is the day that is preceding to the Eid day, then it becomes fard upon him or wajib upon him to pay Sadaqatul Fitr. So this shows that how important this charity is and how important this Sadaqatul Fitr is. And the other thing that is important, if somebody even does not have this much in saving, like as I mentioned, according to Fiqh Hanafi, $410 Canadian, or the qutu yawmihi lahu wa li ahlihi, the food for the day for himself and the family. But if he has additional clothing, expensive clothing, and stuff at home, that if he or she were to liquidate that, it will reach to this amount, then it is also necessary for them to pay this. So all of these points subhanAllah, to emphasize on the importance and the significance of this sadaqah, this charity. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. Now, so a person who meets this criteria, now it is necessary upon him to pay. Who else he is responsible to pay Sadaqatul Fitr on behalf of? Especially his children who are underage. Yani a child who is not baligh, as I mentioned, and who is not even aqil, yet he has in his account this much amount, then his wali has to pay on his behalf. But if he does not have, or if she does not have, personal saving, whether they are baligh or not, as I said, is irrelevant, then the father is responsible to pay on behalf of those children who are underage, both boys and girls. As far as the wife, parents, and those children who are over the age of puberty are concerned, in Fiqh Hanafi especially, it is stated clearly that he is not responsible, because in one sense it is a charity, in the other sense it is also a ibadat. Therefore, those who are over the age of puberty, they should pay on their own. If the father pays on their behalf, it is acceptable and it will be fine. However, they should be the one, as they have to pray on their own, as they have to fast on their own. Therefore, similarly, they are responsible for their own Sadaqatul Fitr. Likewise, the spouses, if they have this much amount of wealth and saving for them, like zakat, when they pay for their jewelry, it is their responsibility. But generally, husbands, they pay on their behalf. It is fine, but they should know that this is their own obligation and their own responsibility. So this is what we need to know. We are responsible for ourselves and those children, especially who are underage. Those who are over age, you can do so, but it is not a mandatory requirement, an obligation on you. And therefore, you should teach your children who have reached the age of puberty to make them realize, look, this is an obligation. If they don't have money, you give them money, but you ask them to pay, instead of you just pay on their behalf. This way you will train them and you will give them this tarbiyat and teach them the importance of this charity. Now, the other important question that rises is how it used to be paid in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many of us, in fact, especially those who are from non-Arab countries, by and large are ignorant of the details in this regard. Therefore, we often miscalculate or misrepresent and misunderstand, and therefore we do not pay correctly. There are two important things that we need to understand. Looking at the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu and Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhuma, they both say that كان الناس يخرجون يخرجون صدقة الفطر في عهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. The way Salaf al-Salih, يعني Sahaba Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم and Sahaba Rizwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, the way they used to pay Sadaqatul Fitr was that there were 4 things specially mentioned in the hadith. One is date, the other one is barley, sha'ir, and the third one is zabib, raisins, and the fourth one is aqit, yani the sun-baked, cottage cheese. So these were the 4 different things that were used to to pay Sadaqatul Fitr. Not one thing. And then, generally today, it is just what we pay is the bare minimum, the basic line, that what we have here, $10. It is just for us to make things easy, that the $10 that we have stipulated even for this year, as you can see on the BCMA Ramadan timetable, it says $10, but that you should know it is the basic line. That is the basic one, minimum one. But even in the time of Rasulullah ﷺ, they did not use, especially Rasulullah ﷺ did not pay Sadaqatul Fitr with this. Because in Arabia, back in those days, al-hinta was not common. It became common, more predominant, when Islam started to expand and spread far and wide, then during the time of the Khilafat of Umar radiallahu ta'ala an. So during his Khilafah, when he noticed that now even this grain has become very predominantly accessible and available, so he looked at the condition, the quality, and the details of it, and then he included that also in the list of all these 4 that already existed from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the other thing that we need to know, how much did they pay? The way of measuring things were different back in those days than what we have today. Like we have now kilogram, we have pounds and things like that. But back in those days, al-kaylu wal-waznu wal-sa', they had different pots, even one size of this pot and this type of pot, that they would fill in, and according to that, they would be engaging in the trade and selling it off or buying it. So it is mentioned very clearly that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stipulated 1 sa' of barley, 1 sa' of shari, 1 sa' of tamr, 1 sa' of zabib and aqid, all of that. What is 1 sa'? Like I said, no longer it is used. However, scholars and fuqaha, they have looked into this measurement and they converted into the modern calculation. So as per the modern calculation, and there are 2 understandings of this sa', but the one that many of the fuqaha, and I personally also incline towards this position, so 1 sa' is like 3.5 kilogram. 3.5 kilogram, yani 6.5 pounds approximately, or 7 pounds, like that. So imagine that much used to be paid. Dates and raisins, cheese and barley, like 6 to 7 pounds. But with respect to the wheat, the hinta, as I mentioned, Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu says in the hadith, that when Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu came to power as a Khalifa, when he noticed that mashallah now even hinta, people started using it very frequently. Now the situation is, what is interesting to note, is it is reversed. Today this wheat is a lot more cheaper than all of these items that I have mentioned to you, but back in those days it was very expensive. So therefore he said, nisf sa', it will be equal to 1 sa'. And half of the weight of like 3.5, you make half of it, it is going to be equal to like 6 pounds or 7 pounds, yani 3.5 kilogram. So that is what he stipulated and he introduced. But things have changed. Therefore, Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he moved the Khilafah, the Islamic capital from Madinah al-Munawwara to Iraq, as he moved himself to Iraq, so when he looked at the situation, in his time, the hinta had become cheaper. Yani wheat became cheaper, no longer was as expensive as it was in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, as it was in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said, I see now that this has become very cheaper, then why don't you even pay the similar measurement, like as 1 sa', like 3.5 kilogram, to pay your Sadaqatul Fitr. Use the same measurement. Instead of taking half, you take the whole complete amount, which is 3.5 kilogram. That is what he suggested, but the basic understanding is that, of course, this is the minimum requirement that you still, if you want to use, you can use nisf sa', which is like nearly 2 kilograms. But the amount that we can, you can, if you go to a superstore today, you will find it, you can get one bag of white wheat flour, in $10. But like I said, back in those days, things were very different. It was very expensive, food. And now things have become cheaper. And we need to keep in mind all the other options that Rasulullah ﷺ himself and the Sahaba Rizwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, they used. And therefore, we have to pay accordingly. And we must, go over the bare minimum at least to make our Sadaqatul Fitr more fruitful and beneficial. And so therefore, when we look at the discussion among the fuqaha, rahimahumullah ta'ala, we learn that when it was asked, what is the preferred way of paying Sadaqatul Fitr? Of course, what we pay, as I mentioned, is a bare minimum, is the minimum one. But what is the preferred one? The preferred one is that you pay Sadaqatul Fitr in one of these three ones, either barley or raisin or dates. And it is going to be like $17 or $43 or even $55. So 17 barley and 43 raisin, 55 is the date. Think about it, the difference between the two, right? And the reason that this is preferred for two reasons. One is that this is how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself and Sahaba Rizwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, by and large, they paid their Sadaqatul Fitr. And the second reason being, the second reason to make this one as a preferred position, because in this one, you are going to help the needy more than when you pay just $10. It is beneficial to the faqir as well. So therefore, because of these two reasons, we should choose one of these, suggested amount. Of course, the minimum, as you have heard and learned, but you should go for the higher one, either $17 or $43 or, $55. And the other thing, can I request somebody who is talking to, is have respect to the khutbah. The other important issue that we need to know, this is the debated discussion among the fuqaha, is can we pay in our time, by cash? Because Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i and others, rahimahumullah ta'ala, they are of the opinion, because Rasulullah ﷺ throughout his lifetime and Sahaba Rizwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, they paid directly these food items. And they did not pay in cash, although they had gold, like dirham and dinar. But the society was very different back in those days. People still needed these things. And therefore, that was the best way and preferred way to pay Sadaqatul Fitr. Where things have changed now, therefore, especially in Fiqh Hanafi, and therefore, even Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, and Hasan al-Basri, and Ata ibn Abi Ribah, including Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, they all, and many other fuqaha are of the opinion, it is permissible that you pay your Sadaqatul Fitr by using cash. Because it is in the best interest of also the needy one. If you give him today, for example, wheat, or even raisins, or dates, or even barley, or even cheese, it may not be of his benefit and use. He may have different necessities. He may have different priorities and different needs. But when you give him money, when you give her money, then that money will take care of all of their needs. Therefore, it is preferred in our time that we pay Sadaqatul Fitr by cash. But if somebody wants to pay it, of course it is going to be closer to the Sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ, provided the person who is going to accept is also the source of benefit to him. That is something that we should be mindful of. The other 2-3 points that I want to share, then inshallah will conclude. As many of us are here, immigrants, and alhamdulillah we pay Sadaqatul Fitr. If you pay Sadaqatul Fitr here, you know the amount as I suggested and discussed. But what about if you want to pay overseas, back home in your own countries, whether it's Arab world or India and Pakistan? So what currency that should you use to pay your Sadaqatul Fitr? In this regard, there are 2 important points to keep in mind. One is that whatever is the source of your earning, whichever currency is the source of your earning, you should use that one to pay your Sadaqatul Fitr. For example, if you are earning in dollars, you should use your dollars. Even though if you are to pay back home, and it will, of course, you will say it will multiply 3-4 times. That's not a problem, but your source of earning what matters here. Because you are not earning in rupees or riyal or dirham. You are earning your livelihood in Canadian dollars. Therefore, you should pay out of your Canadian dollars. The other thing is, what is important to keep in mind, what is going to be beneficial, more fruitful to the faqir, to the needy. You should also keep that in mind. And I will give you one example. A person, let's say, because you can pay it anywhere in the world, it doesn't have to be locally, but it is preferred to pay locally to take care of the local Muslims, but it is permissible to pay anywhere. Imagine a Muslim living in India, wants to pay Sadaqatul Fitr here in Canada, and his earning is, of course, in Indian rupees. So if he or she is to pay, Sadaqatul Fitr in Canada by using Indian currency, it will be just $2, like $1, right? Will it be helpful for a person who is receiving here? No. So these are the two things you have to keep in mind. One, your own source of earning. Second, is that going to be sufficient for the poor that is receiving it in the country that he or she is living in? And then you pay accordingly, keeping both of these points in mind. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. And the other one important point to keep in mind is who are the recipients, the legal recipients of Sadaqatul Fitr. Sadaqatul Fitr has the same masarif, as many scholars have said, as the masarif of zakat. Quran speaks of the 8 different categories that you can spend your zakat to: fuqara, masakin, fi sabilillah, and the rest, the one who is, in debt and things like that. And amirina alayha, those who are appointed as the administrator for the zakat, distribution of zakat and the collection of zakat, things like that. So all of those ones are also the legal and rightful permissible recipients of also Sadaqatul Fitr. Just you make sure that the person himself, because the criteria that has been set by fuqaha, as I mentioned, is very, very low, and therefore many people will not qualify to receive Sadaqatul Fitr. You just have to make sure that the person himself doesn't pay Sadaqatul Fitr. These are the points that we need to be mindful of. Now, when we come to the conclusion, 3 things I want to leave you with. Number 1, as I started my khutbah with, we are in the last 2-3 days of the month of Ramadan. Please value your time and make these remaining days of Ramadan the best and the most productive of the entire Ramadan that you have this year. The second thing is, those of us who have already paid Sadaqatul Fitr, as I suggested the amount, you can increase, you can still add more dollars to it according to the explanation that I gave. And it becomes wajib. The third point, the wujub or the fardiyat of Sadaqatul Fitr is actually after Ramadan is over. The day when the Ramadan is over, right after the sunset, according to many fuqaha, it becomes fard. But according to Ahnaf, Fiqh Hanafi, it becomes fard, wajib, the morning of Eid prayer. But can we pay ahead of time? Yes, Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, he says that Sahaba rizwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they used to pay at least 2 to 3 days prior to Eid, because it should go to the needy ones. And it is hard to find the needy one on the day of Eid. Therefore, you should pay as soon as Ramadan starts, so that it goes to those who deserve this ahead of time. And so that Rasulullah said, "Ughnuhum 'an at-tawaf fi hadha al-yawm," so that you give them enough for the day, so that they are also able to join us in celebration of Eid peacefully, without having to worry about for their essential needs on the day of Eid. So this is how you should, calculate, and this is how you should pay, and these are the things that you should be mindful of. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all forms of our charity from us, and may He grant us tawfiq to be the people of generosity in the month of Saqabat and Jud. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله
respected brothers and sisters, I'd like to announce about the Eid location. As we know that we are very much close to the day of Eid, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our ta'at in Ramadan and blesses us with the blessings and the joyous moments of Eid. So as previous years we have decided that we will be inshallah hosting Eid Salah in the Cloudlet Community Center. There is a poster out there on the bulletin board. You can look at it inshallah. So the program is going to be very soon there, and then inshallah we will get to know by tomorrow evening. But the point that I want to share with you is that tomorrow the location, you can check the location. And with respect to the timing, if it happens on Sunday, I mentioned this before, we have very limited time, just for 2 hours, because they have some other events taking place afterwards. Therefore, we will be starting very, very early. Perhaps we will be the one to perform that early salat in the lower, in the greater Vancouver. So 6:30, we will open the door and we will welcome you, and the program will start sharp at 7 a.m. So please be there and bring your own prayer mats, because we are still in the midst of pandemic, so we don't want to be responsible for that. Kindly bring your own prayer mats and be there on time. And then if it is Monday, there is some flexibility in timing. We will announce accordingly, inshallah, Aziz. So we look forward to seeing you all. Jazakumullah khairan.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول